Hi, Misha here, and it's been a long road. We started off looking at some World War II aircraft, even though I made a mistake and picked up an Italian instead of a MiG-3. Oops. Anyway, then we talked about MiGs, then Suhois, and now we kind of come to the latest and greatest in the Russian Air Force, the VKS. The 50s, the 60s, and the 70s were really dominated by MiG. But then, after the end of the USSR, it became Suhoi's turn. And they really have been equipping Russia. Yes, the MiG-29 is still in service, and there has been some success with the MiG-31, and the MiG-35 kind of exists. But it's mostly been Suhoi. And in the 21st century, they've done a whole lot to keep their designs up to date. First, they started with modernizing the classic flanker with the SU-27 SM and even the SM-3 now. And from there, they spun that off to the SU-27M, which became the SU-35S here. But that was really about as far as the design could be taken. After it was time for a clean sheet. And actually there was a competition between Suhoi and MiG, at least at one time. I'm talking, of course, about the SU-57, aka the FELON, or the T50, or the PAK. And I have the two models here, as I promised a while back. We're going to talk about where this aircraft is as we get in towards the end of 2021 and compare models from Air Force One here and Hobbymaster here. Both of these are 1/72 scale diecast, and both are, well, the Air Force One is a little bit cheaper, but not a significant amount, frankly. So we'll talk about this and have some fun and talk about Suhois. For whatever reason, I really like this 27 SM, even though it's just a flanker. It just is neat. But with that, we're going to have to go back to the 1970s to disco and the fuel shortage and Jimmy Carter. In the Soviet Russia, in 1979, a project known as I-90 got started. And this was to be the next generation multi-role, multi-purpose fighter. They had just selected MiG to do the light tactical fighter and Suhoi to do the heavy strategic fighter. MiG was just about to come into production. The Suhoi was some time out. So we were just in the design phase. And MiG was selected to carry this forward. And they would call this the MiG 144, at least their plans and drawings. Suhoi, for their part, even though they were kind of cut out, worked on it internally. In the end, it really didn't matter because this went little of nowhere. And finally, in 2000, the program was officially killed. Yeah, it lingered on for over 2 decades. And Suhoi's program was first known as the S-37, then later the SU-47. Either way, blah, 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 blah. A new competition, which would become the PAK, was announced in April of 2001. And again, both MiG and Suhoi's design bureaus competed for this contract. MiG thought if Suhoi, Yak, in itself all combined efforts, they could produce a cutting-edge 5th-generation fighter to challenge the Eurofighter Typhoon and America's F-22, and maybe whatever China was cooking up. Sukhoi, on the other hand, pretty much just wanted to do it all using subcontractors where and if necessary. Well, in April of 2002, Sukhoi was selected, and the project internally there was known as the T50, and work would progress. In 2004, the initial design concept work was complete. In 2005, the government liked what they saw and they started funding the project. And in 2007, people announced, rather optimistically as it would turn out, that the preliminary design work was done and they were ready to start manufacturing the first prototype. And they said, oh, we'll have 3 flying prototypes ready by 2009. No problem. Well, you know how that goes. There were many problems and many delays because this ended up being a very ambitious aircraft. By the way, MiG was kind of left in the cold. MiG wanted to do something a little bit cheaper, lighter, it's more manageable, which probably would have gone into service faster, but would not have been near as cutting edge. So with that, what did Sukhoi really come up with here? What is a true 5th generation fighter? Well, in 2009, they at least had the design finalized, and they were just about to finish the first prototype, known as the T50-1. They would do taxi testing on December 24, but flight testing would actually have to wait until January 29th, 2010. There had been many delays because this was something very different for Russia. Some good, some bad. So let's look at the Air Force One model. This is 66 feet long with a 46-foot wingspan, but it's also very thin. And they did everything they could to minimize the radar signature, especially head-on. Even with the SU-35, that was mostly how they were concerned with it, the approach in. Sukhoi claims that it has a return signature 30 times less than the SU-27, and anywhere from 0.1 meters to 1.0 meters return, depending on angle and all that stuff. And they use all the typical tactics you would imagine for a modern stealth, you know, flush riveting, different paints and coatings, angles, all that good stuff. And of course, treating the cockpit to, and most of the probes are either flush fit or retractable. We have the 2 engines from the SU-35S, the AL-41F, and they are thrust vectorable on all 3 axes, whereas the 35S was only 2. It is capable of being aerial refueled, at least that's one of the options. Crew of 1. As far as armament, we have one 30mm cannon, lightweight, because this whole thing was designed to be lightweight. And then we have a total of 4 internal weapons bays. 1 bay up front, 1 bay in the back. These are about 14 feet by 3 feet. Each of them holds 2 medium range, beyond visual range missiles. Currently it's the R-77M, an updated version of that. We also have a small bay on each little wing here. And each one holds a single R-73M short-range missile. So we can store up to 6 missiles internally, and we have up to 6 attachment points externally for missiles or fuel tanks or bombs or what have you, 3 on each wing. And it has all your other modern stuff with modern electronics, avionics. You know the drill by now. All moving tail here. This is a radical redesign, and it's a new aircraft. In fact, Sukhoi is hoping this will kind of kick off a whole new family for them. They've already created the SU-57 variant for Russia and an SU-57E variant for export. However, it's been slow going. We had our first prototype flying in 2010. The second one would come in March of 2011. And by 2013, we had 5 flying prototypes. But then they noticed some problems. During stress testing, there were cracks and stress fractures. So with the 6th prototype, they actually had to reinforce the structure. This is built with a lot of composite material, so they had to add more. They also enlarged the wing a bit, and they altered this stinger in the back a bit, and a few other minor changes. The other original prototypes were updated to the new standard, although one prototype would be lost in a crash. So going forward, this Stage 2 variant would be produced in small numbers for testing. And they were originally hoping to have these in full production by 2016 and in military service by 2017. But that's obviously not likely. Originally, Russia was planning on purchasing 150 of these. Then the order was reduced to 55. And then in 2018, it was reduced to 12. Well, why? After all this time and work, was it a bad aircraft, or what was going on? Frankly, Sukhoi had its own self to blame. They did a very good job economically updating the SU-27 fleet. The SU-34 was doing very well, but it was really the SU-35 here. This ended up being a test bed for some of the avionics, the thrust vectoring engine system, and some of the newer weapons that were going to go into the PAK fall. But the aircraft works so well, I should say. This is considered a generation 4.5 by the rest of the world, although Russia insists on calling it a 4++. It was just an unexpected success, even though it was meant to be an interim measure. And so Russia has just pretty much said this: the SU-35 is doing so well as a multi-role fighter. We still want the SU-57. We just don't need that many of them, frankly. Plus, while the AL-41 engine is doing really well in the 35, in the SU-57 here, it's coming across as a little underpowered. But this is no slowpoke. It's still capable of Mach 2, and it's capable of super cruise. And it does have a maximum altitude of 66,000 feet. But because it is a very thin design, there isn't much space for internal fuel, at least not compared to the original SU-27. And so, there have to be compromises made. And this does require Russia to really tighten up production tolerances and kind of change how they've done things forever to produce an aircraft with stealth or low visibility attributes. So we've looked at the Air Force One here for a bit. Let me flip it upside down. Of course, it does have gear up or down, and you can display it with the bay doors open. But let's check out the Hobbymaster and continue on with the history. And here's our Hobbymaster, and it has two external tanks, something we haven't seen on many Sukhois, at least aside from the SU-25, because they've had quite a bit of internal storage. But this is a thinner, smaller, lighter aircraft, so for increased range, it does need them. Now with these, it has about twice the range of the SU-27, so that's good. And we have two of the updated R-77 missiles. Typically, if it's going to have external stores, you could have 4 of these plus 2 of the smaller R-74Ms externally mounted, plus of course the internal base. The Russian Air Force would first get their hands on one of the prototypes for its own testing in February of 2014, but this was still an early version. And like I said, by 2018, a contract had been signed for 12 actual production models. Also that year, the FELON had its first international flight. In February, 2 of these would fly down to Syria for field testing, and then they would be joined by 2 more, so 4 were sent down, and they would fly around 10 missions in a combat zone, a combat theater, and even launch ordnance there. But these are still pre-production or late prototype examples. So yeah, Sukhoi tooled up, but then in May of 2019, the Putin announced that Russia was going to purchase 76 of the new fighter. And in June, that was made official. It was signed for. So the production order went from 150 down to 55, down to 12, back up to 76. And in July, Sukhoi announced that they were beginning full rate production. And later that year, they delivered what they considered the first production model SU-57, and the second production model was built and delivered in 2020, last year. And on Christmas Day, December 25th, the Russian Air Force announced that the SU-57 was finally in VKS service. And I just looked on Wikipedia on the Air Force page, and it shows the SU-57 in service, and it shows that they have a grand total of 1, at least in actual squadron service. The other ones are for testing and trials and all that. But they do plan to have at least 3 regiments of these. And then, of course, the SU-35 and even the SU-27 are still going to be the kind of workhorses of the fleet. So will they produce a bunch of these, or at least, 76? Well, the original contract signed in 2019 calls for the order to be completed by 2028. So maybe they'll start cracking the whip and, producing these. Sukhoi claims that this has fewer parts and is actually streamlined for mass production with 21st century technology. So maybe once they get it right, they really can start just turning these out. And Russia makes a lot of claims about this aircraft. Not only about its stealthiness, but also they consider it to be a true super cruise aircraft with true what they call super maneuverability. It does have the thrust vectoring. It does have pretty much everything that the 35 has, and then some. And again, it is a thinner, lighter airframe. And when the weapons are carried inside, it has very little drag. Now, a lot of people aren't happy with the Saturn 41 engine, so there are plans to develop a new engine. In fact, it's already been tested, but not put into full rate production. So there's hopes that if they introduce a more powerful engine that's also stealthier, that'll really help things out with acceleration and climb and what have you. And this should become the SU-57M. So they're already working on a modernized, updated version. At a time, they've produced exactly 12. But 10 of these are prototype or demo pre-production models. Only 2 are actually full rate production models, according to Sukhoi. Now, India was interested at a time, back around 2010, but they kind of flirted around for a bit and backed out around 2013, 2014. And a few other international customers have expressed interest, and Russia's willing to export this, or at least a version of this. Maybe not having all the most modern gear, but yeah. We'll just have to see how it turns out. Russia makes a lot of big claims. They claim that it's certainly better than the F-35, better than the Typhoon, the French Rafale, even the F-22 Raptor, and of course the Chinese J-20. They of course claim it's better than that. Just saying what they claim. They make a lot of big claims about this. Keep in mind it took them 20 years to build a dozen, and most of those aren't even combat capable. So we will see. But what we do have are these models. So you've hopefully been able to see the Hobby Master here. This is a more recent one. These just came out a while back. The Air Force One examples have been on the market a year or two longer, and they've done a few different variants. Hobby Master so far has just released 2 of these. There's this one here, which is meant to be a production model from 2019, and they just released a pre-production model from 2016. These do come with the usual Hobby Master features: canopy open and closed. Set you down again. And you can display it with the doors open or closed, gear up or down, and it does come with I think 6 missiles and these 2 fuel tanks. Hobby Collector claims that they're going to ship them with the R-74 and R-77M, but mine only came with this 1 missile type, 6 of them, so I don't know if that was a mistake or what. It is worth pointing out that for the small little wing bays, a custom purpose thin lightweight missile, again one of the R-74 variants, is being designed and produced. But it seems like the central bays will be the main one. And this is capable of not just air-to-air, but also air-to-surface. It can launch guided munitions, either anti-shipping or anti-ground. But it's really hard to determine what its issued weapons will be, because it hasn't really seen any combat outside of that little bit of flirtation in 2018 in Syria. They did actually send some back in 2019 for the second round of field testing, so they've been out of the country a couple of times. But in 2021, there hasn't been a lot of news aside from some more testing with the alternative engine. We'll see where it goes. With that, yeah, our two models here. The Hobbymaster versus the Air Force One. Which one do you like better? I think the answer is probably pretty obvious, but you never know. And neither is a very bad model at all. And they're both quite unique. Both have gear up or down, bays open or closed. I do like the metal stand of the Air Force One. It's very ornate, but it's also very tall. It's actually very hard to fit these on shelves. The Hobbymaster stand is just plastic, but it's shorter, and as you saw, it does kind of cradle in the little tunnel here and plugs in very tight. So for a Hobbymaster stand, it's not bad at all. And they're both pretty much all metal. I think the Air Force One maybe weighs a little bit more, but the Hobbymaster has a little bit more detailing, you know, bobbles and humps and little antenna and ports. Of course, I could say that the Air Force One here is more of a prototype example, and the Hobbymaster is more of a production example. Mostly because when the Air Force One was being created, the full production model didn't exist in the world yet. It is worth saying that the cockpit detail and pilot in the Air Force One, for one thing, he's not removable. But for another, in the Hobbymaster, there's just more detail. I believe these are about $90, the Air Force Ones, and the Hobbymasters are about $110 to $120. Like I said, not significantly different either way. But the Hobbymaster does come with a little bit more ordnance and has all the wing accessories, whereas the Air Force One just has the open or closed bays. I don't hate the Air Force One, though. For one thing, it came out earlier and gave us a very respectable PAK. But, yeah, the Hobbymaster does a better job, as you would expect. And it matches the other Suhois we've had previously. So, yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of comparison and kind of gets us up to date on Russian fighter jets. I will cover the SU-30 when the Hobbymaster model makes it out. It's supposed to come in November. We'll see if that happens. But when it does come, I will add the Flanker C to the list. So feel free to please comment, and if you could, like, share, and subscribe, and all that good stuff. I'm going to go for a rest. It's been a long video day. This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.